on. Yeah. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at the Kearney Public Library. We're going to start getting organized to get started. My name is Denise Sweener. I am CEO of Buffalo County Community Partners, and welcome. We're really excited to see you and also have our
You're great
partners with us. I realized she's trying to film me, and I'm trying to like get out of the way. So what some of you may have heard Buffalo County Community Partners for the first time. We are a nonprofit here in Kearney that serve all the communities of Buffalo County. We identify issues that are in our community. We bring people together to help bring innovative solutions to some of the problems that we find in our community. And sometimes those are really in-depth systems or social complex issues in the community that we really are trying to solve, like food security. Things like that, behavioral health, substance use, all those different things that just are really challenging in communities and really impact the health of others. So we're excited to have our team here. We have a few of our staff members that just maybe raise your hand and give a wave. Some are standing, some are sitting, but we got a great staff of about 13. We currently are on the University of Nebraska at Kearney campus right now. We are going to be near homeless come July, so we're working really hard on that. We're helping the community not to be near homeless as well as ourselves, but we got a plan. We hope it all comes together. And then there's also members here from the Buffalo County Food Leaders, and I'm so proud of the work that the food leaders have been doing for the last 5-6 years, I bet. So if you want to raise your hands and maybe give a big shake of your hand or stand or whatever, we want to recognize you guys as well. Thank you for the time that you've given to month-by-month meetings to talk about food security and helping us bring Ken and Center for Rural Affairs to the table. So without ado, I've been asked to do an introduction of Ken. And also, I want to thank the Center for Rural Affairs. They have been a tremendous partner in Buffalo County. We could not be doing this work without them. And they've walked alongside us. They've inspired us. They've showed us a vision that's achievable. And I think in most cases, we've been able to achieve that as a community. So thank you to the Center for Rural Affairs. So Ken, I think, sounds a little bit like us. When I was reading his bio, he holds more than 50 years of inner city experience in rural community capacity building. And his local economic analysis have promoted food networks in 155 regions in 42 states. 2 provinces, and 4 tribal nations. He's developed strategic regional food plans. And think about that. How hard is it just to do that in Buffalo County or your own community or your own home? But he's doing this across 20 regions. And he has consulted with USDA Agricultural and Marketing Service and the Colorado State University as one of the 14 co-authors of a toolkit for measuring economic impacts of local food development. So really excited to be able to keep talking about growing local, and I think this is a really wonderful opportunity that the Center for Rural Affairs has brought to us. Meter has served as a co-editor of Sustainable Food System Assessment, Lessons from a Global Practice, published by Routledge in UK in 2019. He is also a member of the International Economic Development Council and the American Evaluation Association, and is invited to speak to many groups like us. So we are honored that he is willing to share his Central Nebraska research here in Kearney for all those that would be interested. And he's been doing this all over the country. So thank you, Ken, for your help. I think he's online, right?
He is. And as we're doing this, I'm like, I'm wondering if we should switch to so that the folks in the room can see Ken. Does that make sense if we just move this guy over? Thank you for bearing with us for one last minute tech for this screen. Which cord am I going to? Is it this one? Okay. Perfect. Can we just switch where the laptops are? Do you mind? Thank you. Thanks. There we go. Okay, Ken, can you go ahead and say something? We could do a tech check too.
I can say something. First of all, thank you for that wonderful warm welcome.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate the chance to be visiting you folks in Central Nebraska today. And I want to echo praise for Center for Rural Affairs for just doing such a great job of bringing me to Nebraska and helping spread the word about this really important data. I'm going to talk today a little bit about the report that we put together earlier this year, covering the farm and food economy of Central Nebraska, and I'll show you a map of that in a minute, of that region. I'm going to start with this first slide, just showing, this is not Central Nebraska because I have not had a chance to come out your way near Kearney to visit, but this is a picture that I took about 8 years ago from the cemetery where my great-grandparents are buried, and my grandparents are buried in Otoe County, Nebraska. And so this is very dear to my heart because I love the view from their cemetery and the Catholic Church nearby to the rolling fields. This is a view looking east towards the Missouri River, and I'm really fond of that place. So I'll show you a little bit more about my Nebraska background in a minute, but I just wanted to highlight that photograph before we get started. As I mentioned, I have a Nebraska farm heritage, and we already know, I guess, my bio from the description we've heard already, so I won't dwell on this, but it's a little glimpse on what I bring to this conversation. This is a map showing the places I've been lucky enough to work in the last 20 years or so. And it's been an incredible education for me to get to most of these places and to meet with groups like you who are having the same conversation, but in their own unique way, in their own unique place, to say, what do we do to get more choice over the foods that we eat? And how do we lead healthier lives? And how do we really move forward to make things better for ourselves? And I'm really honored to be part of this movement and part of all these places that have welcomed me to learn about their places and hopefully to add some value to what they're doing. The green areas are small regional studies I've done, and the brown states are statewide studies, including Nebraska. I do not show the regions in Nebraska on this slide, but I'll show you those very quickly. I want to start by stepping back and saying, what should a food system accomplish? Because I think we often, in America especially, we get kind of stuck talking about food as if it's only about who makes money or who's the most visible or most famous. And I think it's important to realize the food system is much more than money. It's really something much more complicated. My short answer for that, which I think is very oversimplified, but still complex enough that I should say it's complex, but I think it's simple enough that I can communicate it. I would like to say that we want to build in our communities health, wealth, connection, and capacity. I don't think anyone in this room will be surprised if I say that food is the best vehicle we have for leading healthy lives. The food we eat and the choices we make around what to eat and when to eat it are really critical to staying away from the medical system, but also to having prosperous and vital lives. But we often have policy discussions without talking about the health impacts of the food we eat. I also do think building wealth is important, especially for farmers. If farmers are not building wealth in the food system, it will not be sustainable over time. And I'll show you some data about that as we go forward in the presentation. Another theme that I think is often overlooked is our need to connect around food. When we have meetings, we tend to offer food to people to help people socialize together. When I have my family over for a holiday, I'm serving the foods that my great-grandmother served in Europe before the family came over to this country, because I'm really saying, these are my people, this is where I came from, these were the foods that were convenient and easy to raise in the places where my family dwelled. And that whole need to connect around food is something, again, we totally lack in most of the farm policy conversations I've been part of. Finally, I think our food system needs to build capacity. And I'm really struck by the fact we have very fancy foods, really nice packaging, really beautiful labeling, and a lot of us are dumber about food now than we were 100 years ago. I would guess that if we'd had a meeting in Kearney in 1925, most everyone in the room would have known a farmer or would have known how to take a pig from animal to pork if need be. And now we have people who are living in inner city homes, and maybe some of your constituents, who didn't even buy pots or pans for their kitchen because they thought food was a matter of microwaving something and going out. And what we've lost in that process is a real sense of where does our food come from? Can we make our own choices about food? Do we really have the capacity to handle food well as we prepare it and eat it? And that's equally important to the other three parts of my vision. So my argument is we want a food system that builds health, wealth, connection, and capacity. If I had more time, I might want to walk you through why I think the current food system we have is failing on all four of those counts. I won't dwell on that today. I'm happy to talk about it more later. But I have a strong hunch that most of you who work with food insecurity know this already. So it would not be a surprise if I say that. But I just want to kind of step back and say the answers are complex. And the way we have to think about it has to be more complicated than just who's famous. Another little rant I'd like to make is to talk about how we talk about food. This is a map that I've used when I want to calculate how much value is added by the processor from what the producer created by raising raw materials on their farm, and how much value is added by the distributor, and so on, all the way to the consumer. This is a very valuable model for those calculations, but I think it's wrong because it's linear. And it also is way too simple for what's actually happening in a food system. I like to take a very similar model, elaborate on a little bit, and I basically put the farmers at the top, and I move everybody through the food system. I move the food through the food system through aggregators, processors, wholesalers, distributors, and other people until it gets to consumers. And in an ideal process, the organic waste from this whole system would be recycled into new compost, new fertility for farmers to use to raise food on their fields. Unfortunately, that's not typically happening. But I also think this circular diagram is a much more accurate depiction of what really happens or what really could happen if we had a food system that we had designed for ourselves for our own reasons. But this is not enough. If you look at the center of the diagram, I also highlight we need good policymakers. We need good researchers. We need technicians, health workers. We need healthy soil, clean air, and clean water. If we don't have that, we're not going to have healthy crops. We need good infrastructure that supports local food trade, and we seldom have that in this country. And the more this food system is fueled on renewable energy, the more resilient it'll be over time. So there's a lot of elements that are not simply about the food and the money moving through the system that are important. I also think this is even too simplistic, because I think that what happens also is that people connect across this diagram. I know farmers that have invested in a meat processing plant, so they have more to say about how their meat is handled and what cuts are given to them when they go purchase that service. Many consumers, maybe some of you, have invested in a retail grocery store, a cooperative grocery, so that they have more choice about which foods the store offers, and more of a sense of independent ownership that will not be buffeted so much by international financial winds. I would argue that these blue connections across the system are just as important as the way food and money move through the system. And to me, this creates a web of relationships that I think is really valuable. And it's a whole networking process that we have tended to forget when we think in linear terms. So I would say that, to me, is my depiction of what a food system, both what it is and what it could be, and how complicated it might be to try to make the food system we have a better one. With that in mind, I want to show you the map of the regions that Center for Rural Affairs defined in Nebraska. This, of course, is your region in Central Nebraska, and I know that you're in Buffalo County today. We also did studies of Panhandle, Mid-Plains, Northeast, Southeast, Lincoln, and Omaha, as well as three of the tribes in Northeast Nebraska. Again, this is a great education for me to learn how similar and how different each of these regions was. And I'm luckily having a chance to make a presentation like this in each of these regions to let people know what we found. And that's been a very exciting conversation for me. And then just a quick personal slide that the star in Otoe County represents roughly the place where my family settled in 1870. My great-grandfather was known as one of the better farmers of Otoe County, but he never owned land, and his son was known as a good farmer who never owned land. He actually married someone who had land who decided she didn't want to live on the farm anymore, so he moved to town with the family. But my father was born on a farm not far from that cemetery I showed in 1903, and he worked as hard as he could to get away from agriculture because he recognized it was a very bad way to make a living. And he was actually quite upset when I decided I wanted to learn why that happened in his life. So here I am. Let me now start getting to some of the data from the study and showing you what I learned. The population trends in Central Nebraska in the last 54 years. I want to add, we're really lucky to have this data, and it's some of the data I'm about to show you is no longer being reported by the federal government, both under the Biden and Trump administrations. Decisions have been made to save money to keep us from knowing what's happening in our local areas. I'm very happy we can tell the story today, but it may not be true in the future without us mobilizing to make sure that's true. Population in Central Nebraska has increased 8% in the last 54 years. That's a tremendous gain compared to some rural areas. I've studied even rural areas in Nebraska. So congratulations on being a place that is increasing in population. That means you have more money to spend to buy food. It also means you have more mouths to feed. So it's more kind of works two ways at once. So now this chart shows the income that the personal income people in the Central Nebraska have earned in the last 54 years, and this is adjusted for inflation. So even after adjusting for it turns out that the value of the dollar today is about 1/8 the value it had in 1969 when this chart was started. But even making that adjustment, income has gone from $6 billion to about $15 billion. $16 billion. That's a 161% increase. It's remarkable to have that much increase in income when the population has increased only 8%. So again, give yourselves credit for whatever you're doing right to have more income at this time than you might expect to have just given the population growth. I'd like to break this income down into sources so we look at where it's coming from. And this chart shows that. You'll see that the number one source of income, the green line, is capital income. This is income from interest, dividend, and rents. So for those of you who are, have bank accounts and stocks and bonds and so on, clearly capital income has been generous and probably is one of the main components of the growth of income. So some people in Central Nebraska are making much more money today through stocks and bonds and investments than they were in 2001, because I don't have data that goes earlier than that. That's a good sign. We looked at this in Lincoln, Nebraska, and found that only 1/5 of the population actually earned this income in Lincoln, Nebraska. So this is a good sign that capitalism has worked for some people in the region. It may not be working for everyone, for all the workers and all the people that you work with on food security. The number two source of income is transfer payments. These are all public programs, things like retirement benefits, like Social Security, SNAP coupons, and so on, that are becoming increasingly important. So again, one of the reasons we have higher income in Central Nebraska today than we had in 2001 is that we have more people getting money through public programs. And this is a good thing because it keeps people spending and it keeps people with jobs and so on. It also is not money that's necessarily generated within the region, so it may be something that can be taken away by public policy in Washington or public policy in Lincoln even. So this is something that's sort of, again, a two-edged thing. It's been a really remarkable growth, but also it may have some downsides. Now, manufacturing is actually the number three source of income, and you see there's been a big increase in that from 2020 to 2022. I don't know the reasons for that. I bet you folks know that better than I do. I think this is good because we tend to think that manufacturing is really the heart of our economy. In some regions I'm working with, it's actually been declining or staying at best steady. So again, this is a sign of some really good positive growth in Central Nebraska. Fourth largest source of income is government jobs. And this has been steadily increasing, about $1.5 billion a year. And this includes educational jobs such as primary school teachers and university teachers and so on, and university staff. But it's again a very important public sector part of the personal income people earn. We go on down to healthcare. Healthcare personal income has increased. That also may be a signal that healthcare costs have increased. Wholesale and retail are wholesale sales of income from wholesale jobs has increased slightly. Retail jobs are about the same today as they were in 2001 after adjusting for inflation. So that gives you a sense of, it's really in many cases it's really only most of the people working in the area are earning money in these sectors or maybe in manufacturing sector. But it shows you those sources of money that we have. One thing I wanted to point out, if you combine the government jobs with the transfer payments, that's 28% of all personal income coming into the county, into the region. And I would just say, for those of you in the room who have friends who are saying we should get the government out of our lives, tell them to be very careful, because this is 1/4 of every dollar earned by someone in the region is coming through some federal program of some government program of some kind. And, that, again, that's very valuable, but it also represents some vulnerability when you talk about, can Central Nebraska take care of its own people, take care of its own needs? Looking a little bit more closely at poverty in Central Nebraska, found that 55,000 residents, about 1/4 of the residents of the region, again, earn less than 185% of federal poverty guidelines. I consider that a better measure of poverty than the 100% level, because it's realistically not a livable wage until you get up to about 185% of the federal poverty guideline. So 1 of every 4 people in your region is in the risk of having no access to food, limited access to food, or some difficulty in their lives because of low income, low wealth. This also compares with other regions of the state. It's actually the same as Metro Lincoln. And so for those of us who think that poverty is an urban matter, it's actually the same poverty rate in Metro Lincoln as in Central Nebraska. You're doing a little better than the Panhandle and a little worse than Metro Omaha. So again, that's sort of worth putting in mind as we think about how do we want to address food insecurity? How do we want to work with low-income people to help themselves ramp out of poverty? I didn't have time to look at food insecurity in a deep way, and I know that you folks are compiling data like this all the time, but just as a sample, I looked at Buffalo County, and Feeding America Mapping the Field Gap currently says that the food insecurity rate is 14.5%. That's about 7,200, 7,300 residents. That's higher than the national average, was about 12%. So a little bit more food insecurity in Buffalo County than in the rest of the country. Feeding America calculates that if you had $5 million a year, it would be enough to give all those people 3 meals every day on a reliable basis. And so one of the questions is, where does that money come from? Is that money that you currently earn? You have $16 billion of personal income in the region. Do you have the resources within the region to cover that? Do you need to find it from somewhere else? The other, I had something else I was going to say about this. I think the other thing it kind of is, I think, striking to me is that I've had data like this in every region of Nebraska that I've studied. And I think it's kind of remarkable to even say that in farm country, we have food insecurity. I don't see any reason why, when we have such productive farms and so many hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland, why anyone should be hungry at all. And I'm wondering how we address that issue as we go forward. There's some people earning even less than you might imagine. 5% of the region's households earn less than $10,000 per year, which is certainly not a livable wage. Now, they may be people who have family helping them out. They may be individual people who own a house and don't have to make payments, but it's still a kind of startling realization in a country that's as prosperous as ours. Residents received $38 million in SNAP benefits in 2022. This is some of the data I can no longer collect from the federal government. And of course, SNAP benefits are in real danger given the fracas in Washington, D.C. right now. So that's $38 million coming in right now that may not be there. And that'll be a challenge for all of you to address. This is down from the pandemic peak of $55 million when we spent a lot of federal money to make sure that people could keep comfortable during a very austere time. So the good news is that the demand for food stamps has gone down in the last 3 years, pretty dramatically. But only on average between 1989 and 2022, SNAP benefits averaged $24 million per year. And as Feeding America calculates, we might need another $5 million every year on top of that to make ends meet. Here's the data that shows SNAP benefits over the last, now I do have this for 53 years only because this has no longer been reported since 2022. And this is again adjusted for inflation. So back in 1969, it was, Buffalo County had very, very few people who qualified or at least asked for food stamps. And that's steadily grown over time, perhaps a matter of people recognizing that they deserve those benefits and shouldn't be shy about claiming them. Perhaps income's getting worse relative to the people who are making more money. I don't know the answers for that, but there's been some ups and downs, but a pretty steady increase in SNAP dollars. And again, this seems like a troubling sign when you're in farm country to have increasing need for food stamps and SNAP benefits when you have farmers growing food all around you. Also, the issue of how much dependent people are on SNAP benefits has come up in the media. So I wanted to compare SNAP benefits with the transfer payments we looked at. This is the same line we saw in the chart before showing all the transfer payments coming into Central Nebraska. This green line is the one I just showed you before, but you put them on the same scale, and you'll notice that even though SNAP benefits are increasing pretty steadily in the last 53 years, they're very small, almost trivial compared with the other transfer payments coming in, such as Social Security benefits and so on. So, again, for those people who think that SNAP is making us poor, that's not the case. And I think it's important to kind of get realistic about these relationships. So this, to me, leads me to ask: could Central Nebraska actually feed itself with all the farm country it has, and the need for food and the poverty that exists? What could Central Nebraska do to feed itself? Well, again, it may be difficult to get good data on consumer markets for food in the future, but I have some data from 2022 to show you for Central Nebraska. This is a photograph from the city of Lincoln. Here, the city provided this photograph showing a community garden where people grow food for themselves, and I'll show you a similar picture at the end of my presentation for somewhere else. So it turns out that the residents of your region purchase about $841 million of food each year, including $529 million to eat at home. And those home purchases are shown below here, and they break down in different categories. And I would submit that $109 million for meat, poultry, fish, and eggs is a market worth going after, and that some farmers in your area might consider that a worthy pursuit. Similarly, $99 million of fruits and vegetables being eaten every year. I would think some farmers would consider that to be a good market to strive for. However, we don't really have currently the infrastructure that makes that trade efficient. So one of our challenges is to build the facilities, the warehouses, the relationships, the trust that would allow us to really make that happen in Central Nebraska if you choose to do that. The other thing I'd like to point out is that this market is actually 3/4 the size of the Lincoln metro market. So for those folks who think that the only markets worth tapping are the urban centers where there's a lot of people who are far from farm country because they're more vulnerable or because they are not able to grow for themselves, I would just remind you that the market for food in central Nebraska is almost as big as the market for a major city like Lincoln. And so it's a market worth striving for. But again, it's very inefficient for us to do that today. We lack the infrastructure and relationships to make that a reality. This is a very rough estimate, but I would estimate that about $760 million of the food that people purchase each year in central Nebraska is spent buying food sourced outside of central Nebraska. And again, this is curious in farm country why so much money is being shipped out when we lack money for food stamps. We lack money for lots of things we'd like to do to improve our own lives. To be spending this much money outside of central Nebraska to bring food in and then shipping most of our farm commodities far away seems like it's not really a workable answer over the long haul. One calculation I did is a very simple calculation. I multiplied the population of the region by $5 by 52, the number of weeks in a year. And if you do that calculation, you find out that every resident either had purchased for them or bought themselves directly from some farmer in the region, farms that earn $60 million. Now, this is not a lot of money compared to the commodity programs that commodities that farmers are currently raising, but it's this would be enough money, for example, to more than double the amount that Feeding America calculates would be need to reduce food insecurity. It's not a trivial amount of money, and it's not money that's currently easy to find in central Nebraska. I'll show you a campaign that was done by some people in another area pretty soon about how they responded to that calculation. Looking at what farmers actually produce, farmers produce about almost $6 billion worth of commodities, and that's an average per year from 1989 to 2022. And once again, this data is no longer being reported by the government, so I have to stop at 2022. The farmers spent $5.3 billion producing those products for the same years on average. And you'll see that's a lot more money than you're going to get from selling food of $60 million worth of food to your neighbors. If we do that calculation, 60 million divided by $5.9 billion is only 1% of current farm cash receipts. So that wouldn't turn the economy around in central Nebraska. What it would do is build new connections, new awareness, new trust between farmers and local consumers, where people develop relations around, I'm buying food from a farmer I know, a farmer knows who eats the food that they raise, and they have a sense of becoming more neighborly and more connected through their interactions with each other. I think the other irony is that you look at what farmers are producing, and this is the sales of the top 4 crops that farmers in the region raise: corn, cattle and calves, soybeans, and hogs and pigs. This is no surprise to anyone in the room. I'm sure you see this on a daily basis as you drive the routes of Buffalo County and elsewhere. But it is curious that if I say, what in this chart can people in, let's say, Kearney actually eat directly, there's very little in any of this that is edible directly. This is what I usually call raw materials for industrial processing, and they're commodities, not really foods. And they're foodstuffs, and they're valuable, but their value is often in helping us make ethanol or helping us run a major meat processing plant, or sometimes corn becomes a sweetener. It becomes an element of making paint, and it's really used for a lot of industrial processes rather than feeding people directly. So I would say that, again, it's kind of interesting that these 4 commodities are so prominent at a time when people are hungry. This is the same data showing you in a pie chart to have you see it visually: the corn, the cattle, soybeans, the hogs and pigs. Other crops are a pretty healthy slice. And you get down here, there's some poultry and eggs, but the sales of that are relatively small. At least this is the sales that are reported. And again, you don't see a lot of food that's directly eaten by human beings on this chart. These 4 products, the top 4 products, represent 3/4 of all the sales from all the farms in the region. So it's very heavily oriented towards those export commodities. Really, most of the rest of this is also food for export, basically. So it's an interesting conundrum that you folks face. I also looked at the population of animals in your region, and there's 1.9 million cattle and calves, and 1.7 million hogs and pigs, and only 229,000 people. And as I was putting this slide together, it occurred to me that it seems to me that the cattle and calves never worry about where their food's coming from on a daily basis. We don't have food insecurity among hogs and pigs. We've made sure that we have infrastructure and resources and money to ensure that all those animals are fed adequately so they can gain as much weight as possible and be shipped away. We can't say the same for the human population of Central Nebraska, where 1 of every 4 people is wondering where their next has a risk of wondering where their next meal might come from. And certainly something 15% of the population is wondering from that at some point during the year. So again, this is a challenge for what priorities do you want in your food system in terms of feeding animals versus feeding yourselves. Now I'm going to look at the farm economy and sort of that farm income for the last 53 years. And once again, this data is no longer being reported, so I had to stop at 2022. But this shows the incredible growth of farm sales over the last 5 decades. The orange line here shows how much farmers have earned selling their products since 1969. This is not adjusted for inflation. This is just the basic sales. The maroon line shows how much it cost them to produce those products. It produced, I think it's very interesting to see. In general, it's been positive, but there have been several years where it's been negative, where farmers are spending more money producing crops and livestock than they get by selling them. And what's really noticeable is that the production expenses have risen in concert with the sales. So as soon as farmers sell more money, production costs increase. This is a time when farmers have more than doubled productivity in their ground. And they have, despite that, really not earning a lot more money today than they were in the past. So if you look at the net income, which is the expenses subtracted from the cash receipts, you get this red line, which from 1969 to 2009 was basically a steady line. It had ups and downs, it had some losses, but it really did not increase commensurate with the vast increases of productivity farmers have adopted. There's been a little bit of improvement in recent years. We had a little bubble here. This was basically related to higher commodity prices during the global housing finance crisis. And that bubble burst very quickly, and farm income went down to below zero in 2017. It's gone up since then, and that's a healthy sign of resilience. I don't know all the reasons for that. I think partly because prices for farmers have been a little bit higher in most recent years. But this is a good sign of sort of some growth and some real success by local farmers, but also not as much return as you'd like to think. You'd like to think that increase in sales really meant an increase in margins as well, and that's not what we're seeing. But also, I want to caution you the same thing I did before, that this is only one way of looking at the reality we face. The income that farmers earn today is, once you adjust that for inflation, because the dollar was worth $8, 8 times the value it is today in 1969 when this chart was started. So I like to take this data and adjust for inflation, and we actually get very different patterns of that data. On the sales chart, we see that sales were pretty steady from 1969 again to 2009. They were pretty linear, and even production expenses were pretty linear. So there was kind of a somewhat stable economy. at that time. And then pretty big increases as farmers were able to sell more with higher prices during the housing crisis and in the last few years. So net income looks higher when we adjust for inflation because the dollars earned in these years are worth so much more. We find out that one of the peaks was 1973 during the OPEC energy crisis when the Soviet Union was buying grain from American farmers and paying in dollars so that we could get dollars back into our economy to compensate for all the dollars we were spending in the Middle East buying oil from OPEC countries. So one of our biggest years in Central Nebraska was due to an international financial crisis. The next big year was due to another international financial crisis during the global housing crisis, when commodity traders moved their money out of home loans into commodities, and that artificially raised the price of commodities for a few years. And that was good for those farmers who could take advantage of it, but it also did not last. So if you look at over the last 54 years, in 10 years, down at the bottom, you can see that in 10 years, farmers have actually spent more farming than they made by selling their products. And that's a troubling sign if you believe that you want a resilient farm economy with prosperous farm families. At the same time, net income from farming is higher today than it was in 1969, and that's a good sign of some progress and some growth. So I don't want to underestimate that. This chart takes the orange line from the previous chart and breaks it into income from crops in the green line and livestock in the maroon line. And I think you see very clearly some trends here. Again, pretty much steady from 1969 to 2009. But crop prices started rising here even before the housing crisis set in. I shouldn't say sales rose. That doesn't mean the prices rose. It might have been a sign that farmers were selling more. But they still were selling about as much as they had sold in 1973. It wasn't dramatic growth over 1973. The housing finance crisis boosted those commodity prices up. That, in turn, forced prices up for livestock growers, and they sold more, but they had to charge more to pay for the higher crop prices they were facing. So I think what you see here is that the growth that we've experienced in the last few years has been led by crops, and livestock producers have followed suit to the extent they're able. I want to break down the maroon line from the first chart into its components as well to show you how that plays out. This is the number one purchasing cost that farmers experience is buying livestock. And again, this is a case where livestock are, when my family was farming, livestock were pretty much raised within the community, and they were either raised on the same farm or sold or traded to a neighbor. They were not really raised to be, they were not purchased from outside on a steady basis. But the livestock purchases have increased pretty steadily in the last 5 decades. Number 2 cost is purchasing feed. That makes sense when you have so many livestock to feed. Number 3 cost is fertilizer and lime. That increase, as you see, that has increased with the increase in sales of crops as people apply more fertilizer and costs have gone up. I would also like to point out that the amount of fertilizer farmers in Central Nebraska purchase right now is about $800–900 million. You notice that's about enough to feed everybody in the whole region all the food they need for a year. So farmers are now spending enough on fertilizer that would be needed to feed the entire population. And that doesn't seem like a resilient food system to me. Other costs include seed purchases, hired labor, and petroleum products. And I think petroleum is the one place you see farmers doing very well at minimizing their reliance on fossil fuels. And that's a sign of very good management and some real devoted effort to try to improve situations. So to sum up, I want to show you the net income of the 3 types of net farm income that the Central Nebraska farmers earn. This red line is the same one you saw before, but the scale is different, so it looks a little bit more jagged, a little bit higher, but don't let that worry you. It's the same numbers. The orange line shows the government payments that farmers have earned ever since 1969. And the blue line is, quote, farm-related income. And this includes, this is basically cash rents. And so when a person owns farmland and they rent it out to someone else to farm, or if they have agritourism or something like that, these are the things that are related to being a farmer that bring income in. They're not raising a crop itself. Well, here are the net sources. You notice that in several years, government payments and cash rents exceeded the income from farming itself. In some years, in the peak global crisis years, farming income was the number one source of net income. So this is very erratic. It's not a sign of long-term stability to me, but it also is, I think, very instructive to look at, why are cash rents more stable than actual income from farming itself? What does that mean to how we think about the economy? If we look at the averages again from 1989 to 2022, the same years I chose for the average of commodity production, I chose those years because it's after the farm credit crisis settled down in the mid-1980s. And it allows us to look at farming income averaging $645 million over those 34 years, cash rents averaging $256 million, and government payments averaging $290. If you add these two payments together, you get about $550 million. So the good news is that farming has been more rewarding than cash rents and government over average. But in some years, farming is not doing very well at all. And we have to think about how do we make that better. I talked about everybody eating in the region eating $5 of food a week. I did a speech like this in Cortez, Colorado, in southwest Colorado a number of years ago, and they went on and found a graphic artist to do a poster like this. They adopted a marketing campaign, say, eat 5, buy 5. The idea was you eat 5 fruits and vegetables a day for health, and you buy $5 worth of food a week from a local farmer. And they basically showed that would create a healthier economy and also healthier people. It cost $200 to put that poster up. It was put up in several businesses in Cortez, Colorado. And when word of that got out, 2 counties nearby adopted the same slogan and the same campaign to really encourage people to buy from local farms whenever possible for the sake of a local economy, for the sake of health. And this is a good step forward in my mind of building a food system that builds health, wealth, connection, and capacity. That's all I want to say for now. Thank you very much for paying attention to what I'm talking about. And I would love to have any comments or questions that any of you may have.
I feel like if we switch the audio to the photo.
Thank you, Ken. I think that was a lot of really good information that you presented. Just here in the room, was there any questions that you guys had for Ken?
Hi, Ken. I'm just wondering, since we are in a state that has, harsh winter climates and growing outside is not possible year round, we also don't have farmers markets that operate year round. I'm wondering if you had success in guiding communities on alternatives or ways that locally grown produce, locally raised pasture beef, hogs, etc., can get in the hands and become available to individuals to purchase versus the other options of going to the big box stores?
That is a great question. And I think, I don't have any single answer. I think all of the things that you talked about are possibilities, to really say, do we need a farmer's market? Can we afford a farmer's market? It's not always easy to do when you have a population scattered around. And you may be aware of the Kansas Rural Grocery Network, where people have been working with grocery stores for 10 or 15 years trying to say, how do we get more local food into grocers? How do we have more financial viability for our grocers that already are in our towns, and less dependency on these global supply networks that are not always thinking about our best interests? I would say this: when I did a study like this in Indiana in 2012, and Indiana was one of those states at the time I was visiting. They were very proud. They were going to beat their chest and say, "We feed the world." And my study showed that they had actually increased the number of farmers markets in Indiana from 50 to 106 in the last 5 years before I did the study, because people who said they fed the world recognized there was no place to buy local food. And these are often in rural areas of Indiana where the population was sparse. And people created gathering points. One market was very genius. They basically said, we'll have a farmer's market. It'll also invite artists to come, and we'll invite musicians to come and performers to come. So we make it a place where you want to visit on Saturday morning, so people who are in a town or near to a town can come gather together and see each other and celebrate being together. And for some regions, that's a very good outcome, because they had the artists and they had the interest in having a chance for people to come and see each other and talk to each other about their food choices on a weekly basis, at least during the season. I think winter time is a bigger challenge, obviously, and one of the discussions among the rural grocers has been, can grocers serve more of a role of kind of being a coordinating point for their own region, where they might add extra storage capacity so that farmers can bring product in and have it be stored at safe temperatures, a safe humidity, so that people can come pick it up later. I'm actually really, it's an idea that no one has really adopted yet, but I think it's a really sound one, is that it would not be very hard to probably raise enough money to convince a few farmers to raise enough potatoes and onions and beets and other root crops, carrots and so on, to basically raise enough for the entire population every year, and to build a warehouse where that can be stored safely, so that when it's inexpensive, you can buy from the farm during harvest, you can store it. That'll have some costs involved with it, but then people can come during the year and pick up from their produce like that. That could be at a local grocery store. It could be a county building. It could be at a nonprofit. But really thinking about how many, and I can very easily calculate this. That it may even be in the study. How many pounds of potatoes would you need to feed the region? And we can make those calculations quickly and just sort of, sit down and saying, let's take one product at a time. Not have to do it all at once, but let's start with carrots. Let's start with potatoes that we know are very popular, and start growing them and making them available, and build some relationships around that lead you to move forward in bigger ways.
I have a question. I noticed something on a previous slide that was maybe concerning that I needed to comment on. That farm labor has stayed the same since basically, I can't remember what year it started, the cost of farm labor, which means that's people working that aren't getting an increase in wages. I know that modernization has affected that, so there's not as many workers maybe, but I know from the agricultural producers I've talked to, the rise in H2A costs and immigration is a huge challenge. So I was just that on your slide really caught my eye.
Well, thank you for noticing that. I didn't want to really dwell on that in my presentation, but I think it's a really important point that we do hear a lot of complaints about how expensive farm labor is, and it's obviously a concern to pay people a living wage and have enough labor to do the work. But I think you're absolutely right. It's not increasing as much as some other costs that we think are quite normal.
Any other questions?
Back on your comment about the potatoes, North Dakota actually has a model called a regional food hub that is actually doing that regionally. They started with potatoes and now they're moving into other groups. It's a co-op. And we're actually part of that conversation with them here in Nebraska.
I didn't hear who's doing that. That's really great to hear.
North Dakota, it's their rural cooperatives. It's called a RAD model, It's a rural food access hub. It's a hub between rural grocery stores to provide. And your example of potatoes was amazing because that was the first food they used. But they're also using other foods within that RAD model.
Well, that's great to hear. And if you could convey to Kirsten some information about that, I'd like to talk to them and find out more what they're doing. But
Conversation.
I'm not surprised. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, she does have it, Kristen does have it, so she's got it jotted down, and I think they're in conversations.
Okay, great. But, potatoes is the number one vegetable we eat. And so it's not a surprise that that's a good place to start. And it's very storable and it's pretty easy to grow in much of the country. So it makes sense to start with something like that. But rather than starting with something that people don't recognize, that's a good way to head forward. I will also put up my contact information on the slide. And
There's one more question, Ken.
Oh, great.
So the citrus farmer up in Alliance, have we done anything in Nebraska to expand like the aquaponics and the wild pellinis that he started in the 1970s? I can't remember his name, but as far as like, is that even an option that we can have throughout Nebraska? Because I've been following him for like 10 years and wondering why we aren't doing that here in Central Nebraska.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you. If you can speak a little closer to the microphone.
The citrus farmer in Alliance, and he started in like 1978. He uses wild pellinis and uses the regular 56 degrees of the ground, and he grows citrus up in Alliance. He has aquaponics and grows fish. What it's tilapia.
Yeah.
They're up there with his aquaponics and with the wild pellinis. And I was wondering, is there a reason we haven't expanded that throughout Nebraska?
I'm sure there's a reason. I don't know it. I think I would say I'm a little bit mixed about aquaponics and using fish in that way. I heard about that first in the 1970s when someone was first bringing that to a research station in Cape Cod. And it's a very ingenious approach to really help you have the fish create fertilizer for the plants. One story I'd like to tell though is I met a farmer in Mississippi who had invested very heavily in aquaponics. He had built 5 aquaponics tanks himself. He was an experienced organic grower, and he had a pretty big clientele built up over 20 years or so of farming and selling organic produce. And he and his son built 5 big, like more than 100 feet long tanks for raising fish to help fertilize his produce. And he told me, I did an interview with him a number of years ago. He said, I started testing the produce was coming out. It didn't have the nutritional value that I thought I wanted to give my customers. And he really stopped selling it because he just said, I don't like selling this to my customers because I'm not sure they're getting the nutrition they deserve of it. And he went on to use his aquaponic tanks for raising basil because he said people don't buy basil for nutrition. They buy it for the flavor. And it's a good high value crop. So I don't mind selling that, but I really stopped selling my produce because of that. The other concern I'd have about aquaponics is, and I really agree with this, but I was doing a tour of a aquaponics facility in North Dakota, again, about 8 or 10 years ago. And a native woman who was part of the tour kind of looked in the tank and she looked at the fish and said, this reminds me of slavery. And she had this very kind of profound response to trapping fish in a tank where they can't swim around and lead more wild lives for the sake of us getting fertility for our products. So I've, I'm not against people learning from that and learning how to do this. And I think it's a worthy pursuit for some people, but I also have not favored it myself. I think I'm more in favor of, like the potato idea of really sort of sitting down and saying, what can we grow with the soil we have and the relationships we have to get really healthy produce in the mouths of people. But, I think it's, I'm having this conversation with hydroponic greenhouses around the country too, that I'm not sure we are getting the same nutritional value out of hydroponics that we get out of growing in soil. And that's a big issue with the organic movement nationally. So I would say my response to that is let's try it. Let's keep growing. And then maybe it's not expanding because people are having similar experience, or maybe when we test nutrition, we'll find that it actually is just as nutritious. But I don't think we know that right now.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate everything that you've shared today. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next presentation. I'm going to present Deborah Sully from the Center for Rural Affairs to share some of the innovative models that they are doing.
And I'll sign off, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to switch to this guy, right?
Perfect. Thank everybody. I'm going to talk about some of the things we're doing here in Buffalo County and what we've been doing within the region. And want to say a special thank you, and I appreciate the kind words from Buffalo County community partners, and say right back at you. We have been amazing partners and very appreciated that you are willing to look into, you're constantly and have always been looking at the challenges within your communities around food insecurity, but also how we are expanding and how can we address that through local foods and fresh, nutritious food options. So I'll be sharing more about some of that collaboration and some of the data that we have found from it. And also I can share, while they're pulling that up, Greenhouse in the Snow, which is what Ben Jewell had posted. That is he has a business and actually can purchase. I've been working with a group in Cody, Nebraska. You may be familiar with their grocery store. It's student run. It's through their school. And they want to purchase the Greenhouse in the Snow so they can actually have it be student runs. They can provide produce through the grocery store. So it's a great learning lab that they have been looking into.
Or do you start a slide?
It's not the one up on the screen. It takes a little bit.
All right. She's just out of it. Just totally fine. There we go. Okay. So I'll go ahead and get started. For our local food access initiatives, we had received a grant from the Department of Health and Human Services to collaborate together. And we brought together 15 leaders from the Buffalo County area to hold a local food leader training. And the training really ranged from anything from, and Robin, you were one of them. I think you were there, weren't you? Yes, okay. So it ranged from how do we bring people together? How do we facilitate a meeting? How do we understand and assess our current food system? So the local food training occurred a few years ago, and that group morphed and adapted into the current local food leaders, Buffalo County local food leaders. And Martha, I don't know if you wanted to share just a little bit about that, or do you want me to go ahead?
Sure. So the Buffalo County Food Leaders meets every month. We meet the first Monday at 10 a.m. and it's always through Zoom. Everyone is welcome to join and learn more about what food insecurity looks like in Buffalo County and the ways that they're being addressed through some of the nutrition assistance program that are the SNAP program, the Double Up Food Bucks program, and then working with pantries too to just continue to collaborate and address some of the challenges that we're seeing around food insecurity. So we've partnered a lot with the Center for Rural Affairs and UNL Extension and many other partners to come together and address some of the food insecurity issues. We do have a data brief that you're able to grab at the table that talks about all the data around food insecurity, the challenges that we see, and then the ways that we're addressing that, and how as the Buffalo County food leaders, they're continuing to have those conversations every month to address food insecurity.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So also through this program, we did some specific, and what's exciting, I just want to back up a moment and say kudos to the Kearney area farmers market. You are one of the very few farmers markets that accept SNAP and double up food bucks at your farmers market. You see that in the urban centers, but we don't see it as much in the rural areas. Though I'll say Norfolk has just added that to their farmers market, and we're seeing it expanded. But I think they're doing that in part because they see that it can be done and it can be successful and it can make a difference. So if you are someone who has SNAP benefits, you can utilize those at the farmers market here in Kearney. And then also, you can be matched with double up food bucks to be able to purchase some of those extra vegetables and produce. So those are great benefits, and we're trying to promote that and share that information out as much as possible. Some other great pieces of this grant work that they did through the farmers market, they do SNAP-friendly taste testing. So they do recipes that you can make with your SNAP. You can purchase all the items with your SNAP benefits, make those recipes in your own home, and then you can taste test it there in the market. So you get the recipe to take home. It's a great way for people to see, how do I make something that's delicious, that's easy, and I can use my SNAP benefits to purchase all of the items that are needed for the recipe. And then we also have done some local food purchasing assistance, and we'll talk more about what that looks like. So here's some information on what SNAP and double up food bucks has looked like specifically at the Kearney area farmers market. In 2021, you can tell this was the beginning year, we had $422 in economic impact. Economic impact, and I have it down here, is SNAP purchased and double up food bucks redeemed together. So they've purchased the amount they've purchased and used their SNAP benefits, and then when they've actually redeemed those double up food bucks dollars, so we know the overall impact of that individual. $422 beginning year, we're exciting, but you can tell the next year kind of blew up on us, and we had a huge growth in what we saw happening at the Kearney area farmers market from 422 to 2,241. In 2023, we actually saw some stagnation, and I don't even have the final number there, but when I looked at the final data, it was around the same as what we saw in 2022. So once the farmers market actually wound down, we got the final numbers in, people have time to get their double up food bucks redeemed. It allowed us to look at that, and we didn't see the growth that we had hoped and seen between 21 and 22. So we took that as a challenge, and so did the Kearney area farmers market, and you look into 2024 and saw some incredible growth, and in fact, the economic impact doubled again, which is really exciting and something that we were really happy to see, because we want to help people to understand that Kearney area farmers market is not a place for an elite to go and purchase their special rutabaga. It is a place for anybody to go and have access to fresh vegetables, fresh and nutritious foods. As part of all of this, we've been working with the vendors at the farmers market. I know a few of you are here today, so thank you so much. And in fact, while before I forget, because I don't want to, Screamin' Chicken Ranch is here, and they brought freeze-dried, right? Okay, I want to make sure. Freeze-dried zucchini chips with ranch and apple chips gala that they wanted to share with everybody. So we'll get those started and passed around if you want to try those out from Screamin' Chicken Ranch. They are wonderful members of the Kearney area farmers market. So what we've been working to do is to help with vendors, help them understand what does it mean when someone comes to your table with a benefit or they are utilizing that. We want them to have the best experience possible, and they might have questions that you might not get from somebody who is more used to that rutabaga than somebody who's not. And how do you help them? How do you help them understand how to prepare those foods? How do you help them understand how best to navigate your foods? Because we want all of our customers at the Kearney area farmers market to be repeat customers. You can utilize those SNAP benefits and double up food bucks benefits every week, and that's what we want. There were also chef demonstrations and food tastings. Again, they brought in people from around the state around the city to help create some of those delicious recipes. And the idea is to push yourself and help you come up with a new way of thinking about fresh fruits and vegetables. Sometimes, if you're like me, you might only be thinking about green beans and tomatoes and corn. You don't need to worry. You might not be thinking about that turnip or whatever it might be. So this allows you to be able to utilize all of those options. Think about it in a new way. Okay, this is the data brief that Martha mentioned. Can I hit a button? Oh, I think the battery's on. So we also had a local food purchasing assistance program that started in, it was actually a federal program, and it started about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, but it was in the eastern part of the state, and it was through the Nebraska Food and Family Foundation, and they were focused in that area, and then they wanted to move it out and roll it out through the rest of the state. Center for Rural Affairs became involved in January of this year, and we were tasked with spending some funds to purchase directly from farmers and donate those to those in need. And it could be anyone from a school system to, well, not school system, but it could be a daycare, it could be food banks, it could be a wide variety of those that could be considered in need. So we used that. We worked with 29 different producers throughout the state. Thank you to Screamin' Chicken Ranch. They were one of them. They brought eggs here to Kearney and dropped them off at food banks for us. And we also launched a program with farmers markets so that we could provide vouchers to individuals living in those communities who could then take them to the farmers market. I'm not sure if that works or not. A little bit louder. I don't know. Anybody, does that sound the same or different? Sounds the same. That's okay. So they can take it to the farmer's market and they can have a shopping experience with that voucher. Each one was worth $10, and we had 272 vouchers that were redeemed. It was only for a 2-month period because unfortunately the program ended in at the end of July. So it's for June and July. But for 272 vouchers, or $2,720 spent at the Kearney area farmers market with those vouchers, we were able to introduce the farmers market to many new, hopefully, shoppers and help them to come back again. I already mentioned that food banks were the primary recipients. Some others were churches, missions. We also went to WIC offices, all different areas. Really, the way it's defined, anyone who lives in a rural area by the federal government, anyone who lived in a rural area was considered in need. So we had the ability to go to a lot of different places with those foods. And thank you to our producers who did those deliveries. I had the great question, I think, that was about how to support year-round. And it is very challenging right now. We don't have a great infrastructure, but we do have some producers that have local foods available year-round. So one example is Setting D Ranch. They come to the farmers market here in Kearney and Grand Island. They also do winter delivery. You can do so purchasing items that are not seasonal. So for example, beef, pork, eggs, honey if they have it in stock, whatever it might be. Storage vegetables. So it could be squash, whatever they might have, you are able to still purchase, but often it has to be directly from the producer. So you have to work harder because there's not a direct market where they can come and sell. One thing I thought was interesting, I was on a call this morning with the Iowa Food Systems Coalition, and several food hubs were on there, and they said that their food sales peak in the winter months. And it's because there are no other local food markets for people to be able to purchase. So people come to them, they have a market, they do CSAs year round. So their sales, their infrastructure allows them to be able to aggregate and sell on behalf of the farmer. So it doesn't have to be direct sales as it has to be currently for us here in Central Nebraska. But we do have some. So for example, Candy Binge. has done some season extending. She has put in some different types of pipes to heat her soil up so she can have warmer soil for longer. She's done more greenhouses. So there's season extension opportunities, but we just don't currently have the infrastructure. It doesn't mean we can't get there, but we need to start thinking about it now to be able to build out those pieces.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay. I think that was it for me. I'll go ahead and turn it over to my colleague Jenna, and then if there's any questions, I have my contact information, but if you have any questions, I can also answer those later.
Up to the first one.
While they're talking about that, Robin just shared that Yanni Parks Garden donated
about 650 pounds of produce to Jubilee Center. About 600 pounds last year. Last year was the first year. And just a shout out to the staff. They are just absolutely amazing, and the volunteers who work there. But really, really proud of what we're doing out there. It's making some contributions.
All right. Hello, my name is Jenna Sutterfield. I'm a local foods associate with the Center for Rural Affairs, and I'm going to talk to you about some work that's going on with Nebraska Farm to School. First off, what is Farm to School? Farm to School encompasses these three main pieces: education, school gardens, and procurement. Farm to School enriches the connection communities have with fresh, healthy food and local food producers by changing food purchasing and education practices at schools and early care and education environments. So it's a very broad program. And I'm going to go over just highlight a few farm to school resources that we have here in Nebraska. Farm to School is a program through the Nebraska Department of Education, and they have a fabulous website and lots of resources. I encourage you to check it out. One of their largest resources is Harvest of the Month. Right now they have 30 different foods available that they highlight every month. And as you can see, everything from apples to winter squash. And they have a variety of resources within each of those products. So everything from like posters, you could hang those up in your school cafeteria, or different coloring sheets for kids. Even at home, you could use that, even outside of the school setting, just to teach kids more about what is being grown locally and what is in season. And they also have this great seasonality chart to show you what is in season and what's available year round in Nebraska. And 7 of these are translated in Spanish currently, and they're working on translating all of them. And next year, they will also be translating them into Vietnamese. And here are some more Harvest of the Month resources specifically for early care and education. So early childhood sites to make it more user-friendly for younger kids. And they also just created this Farm to Early Care and Education Garden Guide. So this is a great resource for little kids to be able to get involved in the garden and learn more about where their food is coming from and what they can grow. And some other resources within Harvest of the Month is they have this video series. So this is great. Maybe you whether you homeschool or you have kids in school that aren't necessarily able to go to a farm on a field trip to see where their food is grown, you can still watch these videos and learn more about these crops that are grown right here in Nebraska. And they also have some food demo series, which is great for kids and adults to learn how to prepare these foods. A resource that we just finished with Department of Education as well as UNL is this specialty crop guide. So we did a 2-year grant with the Department of Education and UNL, and we focused on 8 different rural schools across the state. And each school was able to pick a specialty crop to grow at their school. Anything from mushrooms in little grow kits in their classroom to tomatoes in their greenhouse. We had a school that planted corn behind their school, as well as edible grapes. We even had a school that had goats. And so we've captured all this information into this guide as to show you examples about what your school could be growing, as well as lots of worksheets. They learn all sorts of things, even about like how to market your product, as well as how to budget for it to make sure that you're at least breaking even or making a profit. And so it will be live next week. It'll be at the top of our Farm to School resource page on our website. But we do have some other resources on that website right now that are available. And another great partnership that we have with Department of Education, we just started last year, is we are providing school greenhouse support across the state. So we were able to connect with 51 schools during last school year. And these are a few of them scattered on the map here. But anything from schools that want to start a greenhouse, but they don't know where to start, or schools that have a greenhouse and maybe it's run down and they don't know where to like put their energy and their money to get it up to speed so that they can be growing. So we contract with 2 retired ag educators that have like combined almost 60 years of experience with greenhouses and being ag teachers themselves, and they're a great resource. And so if you know of any schools that would benefit from this, please encourage them to check this out. They do virtual support as well as in person for any schools that need that across the state. And these are just some of the benefits of school gardens and greenhouses. It gives great hands-on real-world learning and responsibility. I was talking with students at a school this spring, and they were talking about how if you don't water the plants, they die. Like, you have to take care of them. Like, it's teaching them real-world responsibility and how to take care of something. And great connections with science, math, health, and entrepreneurship classes that already exist in those schools. And depending on what the schools are growing, a lot of times that food can be taken to the cafeteria. It could be tomatoes on the salad bar, or they could grow it at their community farmers market. Or we have schools like the one that I mentioned that grew mushrooms. They post on Facebook when the mushrooms are available, and within about an hour, they're all sold out from community members commenting that they'll buy them. And it's just a great way to collaborate with the students, the families, and the communities. There might be parents or other teachers or other people in the community that have experience with gardening that can share that with students that don't have as much experience. And then I'll go over a couple ways that you can get involved with Farm to School. A great way right now, we just started about a year ago, is we have a Nebraska Farm to School network that anyone can join. It could be, you can be a community member, be a parent, you can be a teacher, you can be a producer. We have different committees within the network that meet a couple times a year to learn from each other, to hear about what's going on in your community, what do you want to see, and kind of learn from each other about what you can do to grow Farm to School. And then also, these are just some other ideas of ways you can support your school, whether it's purchasing food that your school is growing, as well as supporting your school's FFA chapter, ag education programs, and FCS programs. So those are typically the areas in a school where they're either growing the food or they're learning how to prepare the food. And so that might be as simple as buying fruit from a fundraiser, or buying a calendar, just being involved with those programs and making sure that they're growing and thriving and supporting those teachers and staff as well. Another thing you do is if you have extra produce from your garden, you could ask your school if they would take those donations. Maybe they could use those with their school lunch program or for snacks. Another way is you could help your school if they have an existing garden or greenhouse, or if they're looking at getting one started. You could volunteer to pull weeds. You could water the plants on the weekend. Another way, you could voice support at school board meetings. This picture here is a school that grew popcorn behind their school, and they had to get special permission from their school board to be able to do this. So even just having that community support and showing them that you want to see these programs thrive is very impactful. And this is another school that they had a very rundown greenhouse, but they turned it into their chicken coop, and they now sell eggs to their community. So because the community is willing to support them and buy those eggs every week, they're able to keep that program going. And in turn, the community has access to local farm fresh eggs. I also just wanted to highlight, I know like October is almost over, but October is Farm to School Month nationwide. And here's just some different ideas of ways to celebrate and promote farm to school. Anything from making a poster, learning more. There's lots of resources on the Department of Education's website to learn more about that. And here are just some final QR codes for our school greenhouse support program, as well as resources on the center's website, as well as the Department of Education. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. I believe we just have one more presenter that's going to share. Benjamin Jewell from UNL Extension, who is an educator and is going to talk about the UNL Extension's food system projects that they're doing. So let me stop my share. Maybe connect it to yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much. While we kind of deal with the tech here, I really appreciate everyone giving me a few minutes here to talk about the work that University of Nebraska and Nebraska Extension is doing in the food system space. It's great to be here with you all, and I just appreciate so much the effort and the time that everyone is putting into this there in Buffalo County and the surrounding region. And yeah, I've heard Ken Meter talk a number of times now on the farm and food economy stuff here in the state of Nebraska, and I just think he does such an excellent job, and it's a great way to sort of lay the groundwork for what I'm going to talk about quickly here. I don't want to take up too much of your time. But did just want to talk a little bit about, can you see those slides okay?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, great, thank you. So as mentioned, my name is Ben Jewell. I'm an extension educator for the University of Nebraska Extension. I lead our regional food systems initiative at Nebraska Extension. I'm based in Otoe County, Nebraska, and cover the southeast part of the state. But because of the complexity of food systems, I work all over the state and across the region. So we started as a kind of formal team at the University of Nebraska back in 2018. And much like Ken described, when we first started kind of working together and thinking about, you know, how do we, as the university system, how do we use extension sort of make an impact and make a positive impact on their food systems in our state? We, much like Ken described, came up with this diagram on the right here, which just kind of really at the beginning trying to identify, we knew that the university had been working in the food system for decades, you know, from the beginning, basically. This is kind of what we do at Extension. We work with farmers, we work with communities, we work on healthy food access and lots of things. So we started mapping out where in the different sectors of the food systems do we work. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but each of those little icons around the circle there are programs at the university that impact different sectors of the food system. This is a couple years old, so some of this has changed a bit, but you get the idea here, just that we are attempting to and trying to touch every sector of the food system with our work and our efforts here at the University of Nebraska. And we started digging into this, and we came up with this idea or this concept that really has been the motivating sort of concept for us as we've done our work over the last 70+ years. Nebraska, as Ken talked about very eloquently and with tons of data and information that was great for me, that I didn't have to go into that, and I can spare you all the details. But as the top 3 agricultural producer in the country, Nebraska is great at feeding the world, but we're less good at feeding ourselves. And Ken really laid out the complexity of all that and why that is the case, so I don't have to do that again. But really, so much inertia, so much momentum is built into export marketing of our farm products, and that creates a lot of complications, including the food insecurity rates, the access to food, and all the things that Ken talked about so well. But this kind of idea that how do we start to think about the way that Nebraska's agricultural system is geared towards feeding the world, and how can we make some progress on feeding ourselves as a primary sort of force in what we do here in agriculture. So here's just touch on a few ways in which we work in the food system for Nebraska Extension and across the university system. We are a research institution, right? We're an R1 research institution here in the state of Nebraska, the #1. And so we do a lot of research, and a lot of what we've been working on is asset mapping as well. I think one of the things that's hard to do in this kind of small scale local food, regional food systems space is to have a really good understanding of what's out there, who's out there, what's already happening that's related to direct markets of human food. And so we've been working on a couple different things. What you're looking at here is a supply chain map that we've been partnering with Market Maker. I will talk about that a little bit more here in a sec. And basically what this is the kind of main pieces of the beef supply chain in the state of Nebraska. So you can see the different kind of, I know it's hard to see, but basically each of those different colored icons represents a different stage that in the production system, from raising a cattle to slaughter to retail and all those kind of things. So really we put a lot of our energy and effort into, understanding where there's critical infrastructure in the state, understanding where there's gaps and opportunities to fill in those gaps with some kind of on-the-ground work that kind of gets into our extension and engagement portion of what we do. So kind of leaning on our strengths as a research institution to help our stakeholders better understand the food system in the state of Nebraska and where. Similarly, we've been working a lot in kind of that middle of the supply chain space across the food system. There's been a huge boom in cottage food production in the state of Nebraska. I think there's around 3,000 certified cottage food producers in the state of Nebraska. In our work with these folks and kind of across the state, we recognize that there's, again, just a lack of access to the infrastructure that would help these businesses get off the ground, help them sort of expand their operations, reach new markets, serve the customers in their communities. This map is just kind of, it identifies the density or the number of cottage food producers by county across the state. Again, not super important that you get into the nitty-gritty details here, but the darker the red, the more producers there are in those particular counties. Not surprising, Douglas, Sarpy, Lancaster County, I think between the 3 of them, we have close to 1,000 cottage food producers in that metro area. The circles represent locations of shared use commercial kitchens that these producers could use to expand their production capacity. Again, thinking about Ken's sort of notice, or kind of one of his pieces of being capacity. How do we support these commercial kitchen spaces that then in turn support those small businesses that can create some of these value-added products that addresses some of the issues that were brought up earlier? How do we match seasonality to our seasonality of production here in the state of Nebraska to the need for food year round? Well, part of what we can do is we can take those raw products and add value to them, preserve them, put them on the grocery store shelves, and this cottage food space is a big opportunity there. So again, just kind of leveraging our resources and our strengths as a research institution to kind of make better sense of what's already happening in the food system space, and how we can kind of prop up some improvements that would support small business and the consumers who are trying to get access to this food. We do a lot of work on supporting local markets. We've done some work with farmers markets across the state of Nebraska. 2019 to 2022, we led a project with Center for Rural Affairs and Buy Fresh Buy Local Nebraska, really kind of investigating how do farmers markets operate in the state of Nebraska, particularly in our rural communities. What are the challenges that they face? How can you successfully manage a farmers market in the state of Nebraska in these rural communities? We interviewed 45 or 50 different market managers across the state. We collected their insights and knowledge, created this Rural Farmers Market Handbook that came out a couple years ago. It is up on the Buy Fresh Buy Local website for free to download and look through. It's really a great resource. From that, we developed all kinds of webinars and trainings that kind of help the markets have a more successful managerial approach to their markets. And again, just echoing the kudos to the Buffalo County, the Kearney Farmers Market is just really a highlight for rural farmers market in Nebraska. Have done a fantastic job of building on that engagement with the local community. We support local markets in other ways. Part of what we have been doing this year with farmers markets is collecting pricing data on commonly found fresh produce items at farmers markets in Nebraska. When you are a small scale fresh produce producer in Nebraska, and this is true across the country, there is really almost no data out there to support or to educate on what are the prices that you can expect to receive at a farmer's market for a pound of tomatoes versus at a retail grocery market. It makes it really difficult to run a business if you don't know what consumers are willing to pay you for that particular product. So we've kind of had boots on the ground across the state. This was our first kind of full pilot year. We collected prices weekly from markets in Omaha, Lincoln, McCook, a few weeks in Kearney, and a little bit in Scotts Bluff, just to kind of really pilot the process, figure out what sort of data we can collect. We've started putting out reports that are on our website, and we will use these going forward with our trainings and kind of work with beginning and small farmers who want to do the business projections at the beginning of the year, and make that decision of, is it worth it for me to stand at a farmer's markets for 3 or 4 hours on a Saturday to try and sell these tomatoes when I could maybe just go to a wholesale market, offload a larger quantity, maybe at a lower price, but really how do we kind of have the right data in place to support that business decision making. So this is something that we're wrapping up for the season. We've got another report to come out here for October. And then we'll kind of think about adjusting this for next year and kind of keeping this going. But just another way that we try to support not only the markets, but those vendors, those farmers and producers who are coming to the market. Market Maker, I mentioned earlier, is an extension-led program here in the state of Nebraska. This is a national online platform, but here in Nebraska, it's a totally free database of food and farm businesses in our state. We've got somewhere around 500 or 600 food and farm businesses in our database here in the state of Nebraska. They can create a free profile, promote their products, connect with buyers. As a consumer, you can get on and search for a particular product, search for a particular farmer in your geographic region, and find those products that you're looking for. It also has a lot of really great capacity in terms of food system mapping. So we're using this in some of our research approach as well. And it really just kind of helps us overlay multiple layers of data and types of secondary data on top of the stuff, the profiles that we have for individual food and farm businesses here in the state. We also do some direct work with businesses and trying to support those small farms and small food producers in our state. We were the co-lead of the Heartland Regional Food Business Center that started in 2023, USDA funded program that a big chunk of those funds, it was a $25 million project. And we allocated out $50,000 grants to small food and farm businesses across the 5-state region. Here in Nebraska, we had 16 business builder recipients of these grants. We're currently in the process of investing close to $700,000 in direct support for these 16 businesses. They were able to apply for lots of different equipment. Let's see, what am I? Trailers, trucks, delivery vehicles, things like that would really help them kind of expand out their access to markets, help them reach new markets. They could apply for equipment to process their raw products into value-added products, do marketing and things like that. These folks are in the process of kind of spinning out those funds right now. We provided a lot of technical assistance and monitoring for these folks, and just it was a really great project. Unfortunately, the funding was cut short, so we didn't get to do a second round of business builders, but this is just kind of one of the many ways that we are kind of always on the outlook for what sort of funding sources are out there that would help our small food and farm producers in the state, and how can we kind of get them connected with that opportunity. We're also doing, as I mentioned, we're really kind of taking a pretty close focus on the middle of the supply chain. Again, the cottage food world being a really important one, and just a huge driver of business development potential here in the state of Nebraska. I'm sure this has maybe been mentioned, you're probably aware, but Nebraska Extension does training on the cottage food law in the state of Nebraska. If you want to get certified with the Department of Agriculture, you can take a cottage food law training with our colleague, Cindy Bryson. That covers all the food safety aspects, the rules and regulations of being a cottage food producer in the state of Nebraska. Cindy's work has shown that a lot of these 25 to 3,000 cottage food producers want to start a new business. They want to be an LLC. They want to get that to that brick and mortar stage, but they really don't know, what are the kind of steps to become a successful business owner. So we're starting to put together some resources and opportunities to help these folks get off the ground as a new business. We're going to do some cottage food business Q&A on November. You can see the flyer here. I'm happy to share that out with folks if you're interested. This will all be online, so it can be from anywhere in the state. Would love to get some folks in the Central Nebraska region there to ask questions, to learn about starting a cottage food business and those kind of things. We'll be doing a similar event in Omaha in December. I'm happy to promote that as soon as we got some information ready. Looking to do those in other parts of the state. Would love to do something similar in the Kearney area. In Omaha in December, we're going to host with Nebraska Enterprise Fund a basic business development kind of boot camp. Targeting cottage food producers. We're also working with veteran farmers, so we'll be working with the Farmer Veteran Coalition of Nebraska to kind of reach out to those folks as well. So just wanted to kind of highlight, I think that might be it. Love to stay in touch with folks. My contact information is here. If you're interested, we have a YouTube page, the QR code there. You can follow our recordings. We do a lot of webinars on food system topics. We host speakers from the university and elsewhere on kind of key topics and really try to drill down on some of the issues in the food systems. Here in Nebraska, foodsystems.unl.edu is our website. You can stay in touch with us there. So I'll stop there and just wanted to kind of touch on a few highlights of stuff that we're working on right now. And I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.